States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Trustee Blower?
Yes.
Trustee Yordi?
Yes.
And Trustee Patterson is not present.
Okay, we'll start the meeting off with Matt Haversack.
But if I could start out, if you don't mind. So back, I guess it's been a couple months back, we had a couple good windstorms that came through. We were affected on one. We had some straight line winds. Basically came across Kirching Road, New London Road, Timberman, and then across 128. And Trustee Patterson, I believe, approached me and wanted to know if we had an emergency operations plan, which we didn't. And basically what I told her is what we operate under is the county emergency operations plan ran by Emergency Management Agency. And but she wanted something tailored to our township to where it spells out the roles and responsibilities of the township trustees, the administrator, the fiscal officer who pays the bills, and the department heads. So I tasked Captain Morris on drafting. Actually, I contacted Matt and Jim, and they were gracious enough to send us some templates from FEMA. And I gave the task to Captain Morris, which I think done a fine job copying off of FEMA's plan.
He doesn't have much of a plan.
Yeah, I know. But I believe this plan is good. I believe it spells out the roles and responsibilities. But again, everything in the plan also refers back to the county's operation plan. So we're kind of piggybacking off of them. So Matt, if you wouldn't mind just going through the county's EOP, and if something drastic happened here, you know, what the county would do. And then maybe we can step into our plan, and maybe, I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but maybe look at some of the roles and responsibilities of the Board of Trustees, Administrator, Fiscal Officer. And that's it.
Perfect. Thank you, Chief. Okay, sit here, or did you? Okay, perfect. Well, thank you guys for the opportunity to do this. First of all, I think obviously preparedness is a process and it's not an end result necessarily. So having this process as people change in positions and things like that is very important. In the planning world, we say the plan is only as good as those that are implementing it. So really appreciate you guys being interested in this on behalf of emergency management, not necessarily me or our agency, but in general for this county, because it's good for our residents. With that, appreciate Chief and Cap, I know working on this plan, and Deputy Director Boland has done this in many jurisdictions, so he can talk a little bit about the jurisdictional level. But as Chief mentioned, this is kind of like a organizational structure for how we would get resources from outside of Ross Township into Ross Township. So not only from, if we're bringing them from Middletown Monroe over here, but also if we're bringing them from Warren County over here. I could go into stories all day about various times we've had to do those things, whether it's dump trucks for our public works folks, law enforcement assets for a large incident going on, like for instance, Cincinnati's, trials and Ray Tenzing trial and some of those type of things where we help coordinate state resources, OSP and other law enforcement to coordinate in Westchester and then go down to Cincinnati, things like that. Whereas a number of folks from Ross Township, including the chief, were involved in where we would actually deploy through EMAC to assist another state. And same would work in reverse order. Should we request resources to help us here in Ross Township from another state, we would just reverse that process. So we would be handled and judged legally by this plan. So Jim and myself have reviewed it. I know we sent some comments back, I think a little while back, and appreciate the opportunity to do that. It is in line with our county plan. As you guys are probably aware, you amalgamate into our county plan through the county commissioners. And so you have a Ross Township agreement with the county commissioners and our emergency management to handle that function on your behalf, so to speak. And so we want to make sure that the organization structure here lines up with how the resources would be requested from the county level and beyond. So for instance, again, I mentioned, we have a tornado come through and we have some large incident where we need public works resources, for instance, and we're bringing those in like the Goshen tornadoes not too long ago. We would initiate a what we call is like an area command element here in Ross Township if it affected Ross Township. And we'd have the county emergency operations center on Princeton Road activated. And so those resource requests would funnel from here to there. And then we would make sure that we're bringing the closest, most economical, most efficient resources here in the plant. Technical rescue, obviously hazardous materials and that kind of scenario, but primarily it's public works, fire and law enforcement in those initial settings. We did not identify any critical areas that were outside of our plan. So in terms of coexisting with the plan, it does work very well, what you guys have structured here. And maybe Jim wants to elaborate a little bit on what some of the other communities do in terms of their activation. So essentially now you say you have this plan which identifies your top 4, it looks like positions for in charge of that emergency here in Ross Township, and how they would then interact with the county once we open up our op center. So keep in mind, typically Jim would be, or one of the staff, if not Jim, would be the EOC manager. So he would be handling essentially that resource ordering and bringing those resources from wherever we're getting them to Ross Township to support that.
Yeah, and thank you, Director. So I think as far as, other local jurisdictions in Butler County, the townships that are similar to Ross Township have a plan that's very similar. If they have an emergency operations plan, it is very much similar to the township plan that you guys have in place here and have written here. The largest concern when you're dealing with an emergency operations plan at the local level is having the staff to enact and utilize that plan. And so if you write a plan that identifies 30 people are going to be in what we would call a department operations center, a small group of folks here that are trying to manage that incident, the likelihood that you would actually have the personnel available to man those positions and staff those positions is probably very unlikely. Some communities do. I mean, if we're talking about a larger jurisdiction, a city of Cincinnati, a city of maybe they do have the workforce available, the overhead available to staff those positions. But smaller communities typically do not. And so for that reason, it is typically our recommendation that your local emergency operations plans in smaller jurisdictions and townships stick to more of an area command model. And what that looks like in kind of the FEMA doctrine guidance arena is FEMA recognizes only 3 emergency operations centers: a federal emergency operations center, a state emergency operations center, and a county emergency operations center. At the local level, it would be called a departmental operations center. It does the same function, it coordinates the same ways. It's just a nomenclature issue that identifies it and makes it very clear that we're dealing with a local jurisdiction and not a county level jurisdiction. So those are the terms I kind of want to throw out there first. So in an area command model, you would have a certain amount of people, typically a small amount of decision makers, that would take control of an incident or a series of incidents in the township and would then coordinate with the county emergency operations center to receive resources and personnel and equipment in the event of emergency. An example of this would be for, let's say we have a tornado that only impacts Ross Township. It does not go outside the jurisdictional boundaries of Ross Township. You guys have the only damage in the county. Your fire chief, police chief, public works, they may stand up in area command and identify the various incident scenes that you have within the community. That area command that is then stood up can reach back to the county emergency operations center and request certain resources. The county EOC would then identify where those resources could come from, schedule them, do all the background overhead work and cost tracking and management of those resources, identify where you would like them and have them delivered to you. And then it would be the area command's role to allocate those resources to the most appropriate disaster. Does that make sense? That model works really well for a township jurisdiction who is likely to have a limited number of staff available and not engaged in the emergency that you're trying to deal with. In the event that we had something, again, that was solely located here within Ross Township, there's additional support that we could provide from the County Emergency Management Agency through the Emergency Operations Center. And that could be workspace. So we could have a mobile operations command or mobile operations center provided to give you physical workspace to operate out of. We could potentially bring in resources that have to do with electronics to bring you some computers and stuff if you had a computer issue that had wiped out your IT. We could bring you food and water for your responders or coordinate to deliver mass feeding to your community through the Red Cross and Salvation Army and other partners. That information, the services that we can provide to you are included in our emergency operations plan here at the county level. And I think it's important to talk about the emergency operations plan in context to the statutes and regulations that are related to that. So our emergency operations plan is not my best guess at what we would do in an emergency. It is a plan that is detailed and identified and crosswalked against federal, state, and local guidance for emergency operations plans. This plan goes to Ohio Emergency Management Agency for review. They identify areas where it is consistent with the crosswalk. And so I say crosswalk, it's a survey of the plan that identifies areas where it is acceptable or unacceptable or needs improvement compared against those federal guidelines, state guidelines, local guidelines, and then FEMA doctrine as well. So we call it the crosswalk. That crosswalk is reviewed by planners at the Ohio Emergency Management Agency. Make sure that not only are we in line with all the doctrines and guidances that I spoke about, but also that we are in line and in accordance with the emergency operations plan for the state of Ohio, the national response framework from FEMA, as well as other national recovery framework, things like that from the federal level that identify how those resources are going to travel, kind of vertically and horizontally through a disaster. So this plan is, again, reviewed every 4 years. Not only is it reviewed every 4 years, it's also promulgated and adopted by the Emergency Executive Committee to identify that this is the plan that we have accepted. Our base plan identifies kind of it's very similar to the plan that you have for the township. The base plan kind of goes through the situation and assumptions. It discusses kind of the concept of operations, what it's going to look like when there's a disaster. Then you'll notice we move into emergency support functions. These are functional areas that need additional attention. And these are based off of the federal guidance for emergency support functions. So the functional areas that we identify through the emergency support functions in our plan mirror the emergency support functions at the state level and mirror the emergency support functions at the federal level. Bless you.
Thank you.
Practically what that means and why that is important is we have taken those functional areas and we have further divided them into what we would call our ICS or Incident Command System components. So if in the Incident Command System, which guides our response at the local level, state level, and federal level, the Incident Command System identifies really 5 functional areas: incident command, planning, finance, logistics, and operations. We take those functional areas that are ESFs in our plan, we divide them out into their functional areas, and those functional areas operate together in our emergency operations center to make sure that in the event that we have an emergency, we have the personnel and positions available to address the issues that we have addressed in our emergency operations plan. Those positions are sometimes staffed by emergency management agency personnel. They're sometimes staffed by personnel outside of the emergency management agency, but still in county and local government. And sometimes they're staffed by non-governmental organizations or community partners that we work with, such as hospitals, Red Cross, Salvation Army. Those partners have a seat in our EOC.
So let me, if I could break that down just a little bit too. Again, we've moved to a hybrid model primarily in Ohio, feds now as well. And that's where Jim's talking, we have these core positions, these functions. So a lot of times, please understand this, and when they're calling in more resources, they're going to assign somebody on the team to be a public information officer. They're going to assign somebody to be that logistics or that planning or that operations lead. And then everything's scalable. And so, again, what your plan allows is that you can, if you look on the last 2 pages where you start seeing the breakdown of these positions, it could be a little overwhelming. But you could have more divisions, more branches in any of these particular areas if you need to. So I think where that's important is, again, where the rubber meets the road. Let's take heaven forbid, EF2, technically EF3, I think, in Goshen. There's a little bit of discrepancy there from the Weather Service on that one. But nonetheless, a large, devastating tornado comes through directly through the community. Now you're looking at primary functions of search and rescue, looking at primary functions of volunteer management, debris management, damage assessment, shelter management. So we're going to roll through this plan those up underneath those functions. So some of those functions are going to fall into the operations side. Some of those are going to fall into the logistics side of bringing in resources here to the township. And so then those would be important roles that this plan would activate, and those in charge of the plan would make sure that they would point to those divisions within that organization structure. And then, again, it may be this strong for 2 weeks, and then all of a sudden the debris management piece goes away. So guess what? We just shrink it back down and continue to do that. But it would allow someone, like, again, if you put a chief in as that incident commander role, you could run shifts, and you could have a deputy, or you could have somebody cover over on those opposite time periods. And that would be the point of contact back up from that area command element back to the emergency operations center. That kind of hit what you were looking at, Chief. I mean, in a nutshell, that's everything's scalable, and this is a plan that you guys are looking at for adoption that would be scalable with what the county has in place right now.
Yeah. Instead of going through this thing page by page, have you guys had a chance to go over it?
Right.
And do you have any questions, comments, concerns, or questions that we can answer? Just, I'm thinking about it. I mean, the one evening when we had those straight line winds, we were pretty inundated. But the majority of the damage was done was trees and roadways. And Paul and his guys did a great job. And it's kind of like we're not in limbo, but we take care of township roads. So if we have a tree go down on New London, I don't expect Paul to drop everything he's doing and clearing a county road. And so in this type of situation, even though I called 9Com and advised them to contact the county, would it been a better idea to contact you guys in this situation to activate something, or do you feel that we did the right thing, just letting 9Com handle it? And
yeah, I mean, you could speak too. So I know we were stood up, and actually I think we sent you or Greg down here.
yeah, we had some flooding issues too, I believe.
Yeah. So, again, typical dispatch scenario is a perfect, but again, you hit a point in that case that was pretty much just Ross.
Yeah.
In other cases, it's countywide. And so activation would have been necessary. Right. But when it's more localized, I think that's a perfect scenario where you would say, yeah, we would go through 9Com and get the state to deal with state routes. We deal with the bridge log jams there. I don't know how many times in the last year and a half on Millville.
Yeah.
And it's a great example. Now you're bringing on a state partner. Engaging us in that process is important. And oftentimes, my background was Warren County EMA coming over here, but we're tagged right in there with dispatch. So usually when something's going on the dispatch level, we're in line with it as well. Or you guys reach out and say, hey, here's what we're doing. If we need resources outside of Ross Township, or just our county engineer and our state garage rep, here for ODOT.
Yeah. I mean, that particular situation, I mean, it was kind of crazy how those winds went, but we had a lot of county roads that were impassable, and really my focus was, and Paul's focus was getting our roads opened up. But then, with the county roads, we got to go and verify that the lines are charged. And if they are, stay the hell away until Duke shows up or Buffalo. But touching on that, Paul, I just had a question, just had a thought cross my mind. It's probably never happened, but if that happened again, I mean, we rely on mutual aid so much, for our incidents. Is there anything that you guys have, like as far as road superintendents in the townships that you request?
There's no formal thing in place. I mean, basically, I would call Rob out at Morgan any time of the day and he would help me.
Yeah.
But he's probably the only one that I could do that with right off, top of my head or whatever. But that's what I was going to ask, like, do we have the contacts if we have a situation like that, whose job is it to contact these guys? Or any of us or what? Dispatch, how do we get a hold of you to help out?
That's a great question. So certainly you can request it from your level, chief's level, your department supervisor's level through dispatch.
Okay.
That's usually the fastest, easiest. Now, we have cell phones as well. So just like you call Rob, you could call us.
Okay.
And we can initiate that. But to your point earlier, I think, again, page 12 of this really gets into this, which is section D, our planning assumptions. Number 4 there. I think you hit the nail on the head. So you have standing mutual aid agreements. You may have an agreement with Rob or with Morgan to do X, Y, Z. I don't know if you do. Some jurisdictions do.
It's just up here. It's not written.
Relationship.
Not written in
Whatever
it.
that might be. But B, letter B underneath 4, Ohio's intrastate mutual aid compacts. That's 5502.41 of Ohio Revised Code. So that is what gives Ross Township, that gives you the authority to call Rob and bring Rob's resources in, or chief the authority to call and bring county sheriff's office in, or any other jurisdictional law enforcement. It's within Ohio's bounds. Where it gets sticky is if you have a good relationship with Indiana and you're trying to bring things over the state line. That would not be covered here. So your plan gives you that authority. It spells that out. So if somebody ever came back and said, "Oh, why did you call in Rob to come down here and work?" That legally gives you the binding authority to do so.
Okay.
And that's for that emergency setting. I could go on all day. That's about an 8-hour freebie. So if you call Rob over, his first 8 hours are free. 9, 10, 11, day 2, those are all reimbursable, where he can come back and say, Ross Township, you have to pay Morgan Township for that time.
Can we segue into that?
Sure.
Let's say hypothetically that Morgan Township came in and was helping Paul clear roadways or clearing bridges and stuff. Then if it got into a fiscal, like over an 8-hour period, what would Julie's role be, or what would our role be to get our mutual aid partners?
Like what kind of, the tracking, the paperwork,
Right.
the
Right.
waivers of liability. Yeah.
I feel like I
That's
should
big
bring
stuff.
like Steve Pegram from Goshen to sit here. My wife is Claremont's EMA, so I've been over there with her a little bit, and this process is exactly what's happening right now. The fiscal piece and again, not throwing anybody under the bus, but some of the stuff is days or weeks behind what it could have been from that initial 8 hours. So legally, after 8 hours, you have to have in writing that request. And part of that request would include what is that reimbursement trackable items that you are taking. And so we have a series of forms through the disaster. It's category B, emergency measures for that, I believe, road clearing. So you would want to track whether that's through time cards, whether it's through CAD dispatch for police and fire, all of those hours that somebody is assisting you. And that's something I know, Chief, we got a lot of experience on the incident management team realm. We do 214s and things like that. That's another form of tracking. But as long as you're tracking, 4 dump trucks are here, they're here for 4 hours, they're covering these streets.
Would that be the supervisor? In this case, road, would Paul be the one saying, yeah, I can verify that we had
That's right.
4 additional dump trucks from outside the.
So technically speaking, you could, like, in Goshen's case, they're going back and they're asking for some of that stuff historically weeks prior. Where it's a much cleaner system, and I think if any of us are engaged in this process, we're going to do it right off the bat, is we're going to request, we're going to track those on a daily basis. So something Chief's familiar with, and I know we do them all the time in incident land, is an incident action plan, right? So we're tracking a lot of those resources every day. So we can go back 14 days, 25 days, and we can say these are the people that were in play. And then what we would expect from leadership role on your side is, collect some documentation there. You're going to talk with Rob. Rob's going to tell you he's bringing 2 trucks, 3 guys, they're here for these hours. So even if that's what we call the Form 1, which is a blank sheet of paper, and we're capturing that, or a dry erase board and we're snapping a photo of that, we'll go back and worry about the documentation after the fact.
Yeah, and I think it's important to talk about when you're talking documentation, and this is maybe a little more operational than we intended to go with this, but when you're talking documentation, the best thing is to document everything and document, even if it's information you think is probably not helpful or not useful. Even if it's something you think is not helpful or not useful, document it and maintain those records. I don't know your local records retention policy, but I know at the county level, any documents related to a disaster become permanent records for the county and part of the permanent record. So, every note that I make goes into a box that is then collected and saved and submitted to archives as a record of the emergency. And so even small notes and handwritten stuff and Post-it notes and things like that goes in that box and it is captured. So we can
Crazy valuable down the road. And
It
for the
is.
person having put together one of these requests for reimbursement, it's incredibly valuable to have what got expedited shipping versus what didn't and why. And, you're thinking not straight line wins that are cleaned up in a week, but something that takes us months to recover from. You have to justify why things were used, whether that's natural disaster emergency or civil unrest or something like that.
Well, and I think it's important to note too that the Stafford Act is being applied to many more things than just tornadoes and severe weather events, right? I mean, we've seen COVID as a non-traditional use of the Stafford Act. The Jackson, Mississippi water crisis, right? That may fall under Stafford Act at some point in time. Things that we have historically thought, this isn't really in the framework of emergency management. That has been extended. And so even smaller things that, maybe have a tendency to snowball into larger things, that early documentation is incredibly important because, if this becomes a declared disaster, we have a water system issue, it becomes a declared disaster, that work that you did initially to attempt to mitigate this, that may be eligible for reimbursement. That may be eligible for, a local match of some kind. And so that information and documentation is incredibly important. And again, I think we've all been in an incident where maybe we didn't get the right information or document it immediately, but we had it in a note that we were able to go back to later. That documentation is incredibly important. For fire and law enforcement, we typically rely on CAD records. So when you talk to NINECOM and tell them, hey, we're responding to this or we're departing this, that's a documentation piece that we can get to pretty accurately. Some public works agencies use a software, a project management software that identifies these are the people assigned to this project at this time. That's a record that may be beneficial. I think we've talked to the engineer's office about that system in the past. That stuff is great. If it's like you said, a Form 1 blank sheet of paper, pen and paper done at midnight on the back of your steering wheel, that's great too. Just document as much information as possible.
So a couple pieces there before we get too far out, that resource component, if we're calling in those resources, not only does that allow us to get money back in reimbursement through the Stafford Act, state assistance, which we saw numerous times, it's more common than not, as you get state relief assistance for, again, these floods on the Ohio River, or the tornadoes of 2012, if you remember, went through Claremont County, Moscow and all that. Those were state assistance. They didn't reach a per capita threshold near 17 million in the state level of impact to cause a federal request from the governor to the president. So then if that doesn't happen, in those cases, a state request would come out. And there's lots of opportunities for percentages anywhere from 75 up to 100% that the state would pay back for these costs. Plus, you've taken us a little bit further. We have an incident in the last couple of weeks, potentially. We're calling in resources for that debris, and I'm just taking one particular piece, but this can be extrapolated, obviously. And so now we're tracking those resources, what Morgan Township's using, what they're doing in here helping you, as well as your stuff and the other jurisdictions. And now you're potentially losing tires, breaking equipment, or having to rent things. All of those components then go into that pot of how much was expended. documented, and then now can get reimbursed. The piece that we haven't talked about is what about the liability? There are people that like to see disasters and they like to respond in.
Here I am.
Here I am.
Put me in, coach.
Now, guess
No,
what?
thank you.
And we do this a lot. You know this, chief. Where's your E number? Where's your O number, right? What that is that's your request number.
Yep.
If you were not officially requested, everybody wants to help out. If you were not officially requested, now we're not liable as Ross for somebody that gets hurt, for something that gets broken, for the repayment of those things. And every disaster will have people and organizations that do that. And so that would not be covered. That would not be, from a liability standpoint, it would keep you guys off the hook. I say that because a lot of times, again, in the smaller community side, you know, everybody knows somebody.
If they were requested, you're off the
That's
hook.
right.
If you go ahead and
That's right.
say, hey, I've known you a long time, go ahead and grab this. You used to work for us years ago. You are very much on the hook, right? Okay.
So I don't know who you went to the Blizzard, Baltimore Blizzard, did you go? And good example there, you guys had snowplow people, everybody's got a plow in their truck, I'm coming to work, the city's gonna pay me, right?
Yeah, we had people arrested because they were showing up wanting to go to work and they weren't requested.
Yeah.
It got pretty ugly.
So you would point, in Ross's case, you would point back to, well, we initiated the plan, our resource request process was X. This was not a resource that was requested or tracked. Thank you, go on your way.
And that's where it can help too, if your emergency plan has a way to deal with volunteers or something that gives you in that moment, hey, I've got the crisis control, but you actually need to go over here, and this is where we've got volunteers, and you are now volunteer coordinator to handle this, so that they feel they have a sense of purpose, right? But they're not in the way, they're not creating a liability, they're not a danger to anybody. But I could see this community like showing up, right? I mean, that's the great thing about this community. That is not what we need. So you have to channel that in a direction that's really helpful.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's important to mention when we talk about the disaster after the disaster is documentation, donations management, volunteer management. Those are the things that are headaches beyond headaches, because it could be the middle of summer and a tornado happens and your neighbor just knows everybody needs winter jackets. That's what they need in that time. Or, if a house flooded and you know what these folks need, they need this refrigerator that I had on my back porch that doesn't work.
And it's moldy.
And those folks, whether that's malicious or they're just misguided, that's what we have to deal with in an emergency. Same with volunteers. I just got this brand new chainsaw. I'm happy to cut down whatever you want me to cut down. How much liability are you taking if you identify, hey, this is a volunteer that we're going to receive and accept?
Well, we kind of ran into that a little bit. I don't think the dime would have been on us, but, we had private contractors showing up on state routes.
Yeah.
But they did a hell of a job. Now, in your opinion, is that liability on the state of Ohio or is that liability on Ross Township?
Well, did somebody ask them, put them to work?
I don't think so, Matt.
So if nobody put them to work, then it wouldn't be a liability on you. Now, if you put them to work, there's a chance of liability, but you bring up another point.
But Paul doesn't have the authority to call.
Right.
I don't know why he would do it. Just hypothetically, he called Hendel.
Right.
And had him come down to the trees at 27.
Of all the ones.
I got him on.
But Hendel could volunteer and you could set up a volunteer coordinator. So like Goshen, another great example. So in the right of way, in the public right of way, you have the power to utilize volunteers. That company, you see it during these big events, you bring in all the Bengals players. There's all that publicity and those big things. That's exactly what they're gonna do, is clear the right of way. But what people don't talk about is everybody's got somebody in a private residence that needs help too.
Yeah.
And so I'm not going to go too far on the most recent incidents in the region, but you can't use your public resources on private property. And a lot of time that's a challenge.
Yeah.
The residents don't understand that, and then you talk about private communities like HOAs and things like that. This same Goshen tornado scenario, they had Lake Lorelei. Is that the one that's over there?
No.
Not Hidden Valley, obviously. I think it's like, it's one of it's a large, like a Hidden Valley style lake, right? And it's over there in Brown County. And again, it's a gated community, private community. Well, the prosecutor had problems with taking public resources to do debris management on that site. So we all still have to provide some assistance to them. So that's where then those volunteer groups, those private companies that are willing to donate their time.
There has to be a way to organize them.
That's right. We organize them. We would collect again through a phone operation and people stopping in here. Let's collect, let's do damage assessment. Let's understand what the residents need. So we know this street has 30 needs, this street has 2 needs. And then we would say, okay, we're going to coordinate on Saturday and Sunday to go out, and we would have those volunteers go out and take care of that on behalf of the residents, because you can't put public resources on their private property to do that.
You know, I think for COVID, we utilized a program called Survey 123, which allows us to create surveys. We can put that information out on a QR code or a link that's available. Whoever is in need clicks on it. It links back to the survey. They identify what services they need, what help they need, their name, phone number, and we'll have a volunteer coordinator or donations management coordinator or, whatever kind of process we're dealing with, that whatever coordinator we identify, they will track that information and then provide it back to us as a way to identify, hey, these are the areas that need this help. That survey worked very well during COVID. We were able to build, fill many missions.
Thousands of missions.
Yeah.
For Butler County. But what he said, it's case management, right?
Yeah.
So everybody's going to be, all your phones are going to be ringing with somebody that needs something. So quickly, within that first op or 2-op period, we're going to set up, hey, this is where you call to get information and this is where you call to make requests. And then those would all be tracked. And then, again, I'm going back to the 2012 tornadoes. EF3s in Moscow was a great example. A lot of time, the community in Moscow was not able to take on those volunteers because it was not safe. The roads were not safe for days after that. I think it was like 8 or 9 days. And so what the Emergency Operations Center did was collect all that. Hundreds of people that had needs, hundreds of people that had offers of help. And then day 9, whatever it was, start plugging them together. Hey, it's safe. You can go into this area, this community. We need you. So make it a coordinated effort. That way people aren't looting houses. You don't have these contractors there that are causing insult to injury to some of these folks that are already in a devastated time period, and you're coordinating those efforts. So.
Some of that, like we've talked a little bit about social media and the role of, connections and communication. And I don't know that we're really there for that yet, but that plays a role in a major emergency. That's one of those ways. Those QR codes have to get out there somewhere, right? And I think, Chief, you have a Facebook, there's a fire Facebook, right?
I don't get on.
And police. So there's ways we can get it out there, but just as we're thinking about that too, are we ready at that level, right? To have that communication? Do our department heads have what they need to be able to say, I have 4 backup chains for my chainsaws? And, that's what makes the operations plan different from here's just a very structural plan to here's a really thought out, here's our expectations for what we need to have ready to go, our expectations for how we'll communicate, our expectations for who we think would handle XYZ in partnership for that volunteer piece. If somebody doesn't know that they should do that, if somebody doesn't know the Stafford Act, if somebody doesn't know that, like that should be in here, just a primer, just enough to say, hey, you are the person that's picking this up because you're the one that can make it in. Never heard of the Stafford Act. Let's give you a couple paragraphs and some reference points, right? I think that's what really starts to differentiate.
Yeah, and I think, so one of the things you were talking about there is message mapping, right? So we want to have some basic guidelines of how to go, and I think this plan does that. 37 in a picture, I'm always pictures 1,000 words. 37 looks terrible, that org chart you put in there, but who knows we're doing that? Public information officer, so that's exactly what you're saying. Ross is going to have a public information officer identified, and that's going to make sure that chief's not putting out something that's conflicting with chief. And then guess what? We have a public information officer as well. So now our public information officer is connected with your public information officer. So now we're going to exemplify everything that you say. We're not going to create our own messages. We're going to take what you say. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So that's exactly right. That's how that would go. And I think your plan throughout identifies, again, these roles and responsibilities there.
I think it's important to note too, the Emergency Operations Center and if it's activated in our agency and in general, it exists to be a support and service agency to use. So even if we're not necessarily activated at the, EOC, we have 3 levels of activation with it. We have a monitoring level where we have somebody in there just watching the weather, watching an event, identifying, hey, this may be something that in the next, 2, 4, 6, 8 hours could pop off. Then we could have a partial activation where we have a few people that are in there manning key functions to make sure that if we have a little bit more understanding of something that's happening, or we want to be prepared in case an existing incident kind of expands. Then we have a full activation where we have everybody in there. But at any time, our office, we have a 24/7 duty officer. You can call our 5810 number, 785-5810. You'll talk to one of our duty officers or be able to leave a message that pings all of us. At that point, we're here to support and serve, your agency. So in the same way you talked about, this may be a downburst, right, where you have a very localized, focused damage and it hits Ross Township only. You're more than welcome to call us, and I know you have. But you're more than welcome.
I don't want you guys to think that we're on an island, because we're not. Because all we got to do is pick up a phone, and I mean, we would have more resources out here. You should stick out.
And we have built, we can build surveys and QR codes on the fly and get that information out quick. And a lot of times it's better for us to coordinate that at the county level.
Right.
We provide a volunteer survey that's applicable for Ross Township, Morgan Township, Riley Township, Madison, Middletown. And then when people identify, hey, I want to help, I want to, do something, they put in the location and we can funnel them to the most appropriate resource.
Yeah.
So those resources and that level of support, it doesn't rise to the level of the emergency operations plan. It doesn't rise to the level of activating an EOC, but that's another layer and level of support that we're able to provide to you just through the normal course of our duties.
Can you touch a little bit on the communications as far as the IPAW and the other notification, just so the board and the other 2 department heads, if we had an incident, Danny Young's house across the street, and we wanted to reach a radius of 5,000 feet from his structure. Can you guys explain how your system would work as far as notifying people in a certain area?
Yeah, so there's a couple resources that we have available. One is obviously the normal channels, social media, messaging, and that's typically for non-emergency, just public awareness events. In the event that you had an incident and you needed a message to go out to a specific geographic location, there's really 2 options that we have available. One is our communicator system, and it is, using the 911, reverse 911 data that we have available. We can put a pin on a map, identify a radius around that pin, and send a message to any person in that area with a listed landline or a cell phone that has opted in and tagged their location to the area within that lasso on the GIS map. That system is available. We have people on our staff that are trained to handle that, and they can go in and put that pin on the map, identify the radius, and send that message. In the event of an emergency, obviously we'll use that. But sometimes we'll do that, sometimes that becomes a 9 a.m. thing, depending on the nature of the emergency. We do get a lot of people who are upset about getting a message at 11 o'clock at night, midnight, 1 o'clock. Rightfully so. If it's not an emergency, we're not going to wake people up. But, if we're dealing with, what have we done? Decided to push off to the next one. Missing person.
Zombie attack.
Non-physical missing persons.
Yeah, some things, yeah.
There's be something in the air.
And again, that could be used for even more, traffic related type things.
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden now we have an emergency, gas release or something or whatever that's going to shut down a main drag for a while. We could send that message out, not overnight, but you know what I'm saying, when the sun comes up.
Yeah, so that's the first system that we have. The second system is what's known as Integrated Public Alert and Warning System, or IPAWS. IPAWS is a federal program that we have a vendor that provides access to that system for us. And IPAWS, in the same way that I can put a pin on a map and draw a lasso around it, I can do that for IPAWS. But instead of just hitting the landlines that are GIS coded to fit within that lasso, now I hit all the cell towers that are tied to, that are within that lasso. And any phone that attaches to that cell phone will get a message similar to what you get for an Amber Alert. I just did a big discussion on this yesterday, so I'm really fresh on it. But when we talk about IPAWS, there's some considerations, right? Because let me say this first. We draw a lasso on that. It identifies all the cell towers, and every phone that hits that cell tower will get the message. We can put a duration on that message. So we can send it out as a one-time only. Every cell phone that's attached to that hit it. We can also set a duration on it so that if you are outside of the area and then enter the area that we have circled on the map, that it will ping you again. And that will continue throughout the duration of the alert that we have set. If you are inside the area, you get the initial ping, you leave the area, and then come back while the alert is still active, it will not hit you a second time. So that's one consideration just as far as operations of this is concerned. There's some concerns about IPAWS that are worth mentioning. So IPAWS is a federal program. It's coordinated through the FCC. There's a lot of stipulations on it. This is not an appropriate system. An appropriate use of the system is not to say we have a water main break or we have a the town's favorite dog died and we need to provide the funeral visitation. That it is an emergency only alert.
And let me pause you there, because a lot of people get to see that and really want to use that. My board takes a very strong stance. I have to have a multiple approval process to even send a message out through that system. So there's been challenges of, a SWAT call out. Can we ring the neighborhood? No. So like literally there are even emergency scenarios that system is very rarely used for.
So it's different than the Code Red or Raven 911?
It is. Correct. Yeah, it's actually, there's only authority granted through code for us to send that out. State EMA director can send it out. So, it's a pretty high level thing. You don't want to have those mistakes we've heard about in the news. Oops, we sent out that accidental message.
Warren County sent it out for a water main break, and it was a national issue.
Yep.
So, this is a very serious, program. It's there if we need it. If we have an event that rises to that level, it would be appropriate.
We're going to take a rollover and it's leaking, and all of a sudden now we've got to evacuate this neighborhood. We're going to put that out. We're going to use something like that.
But those, like you said, smaller emergencies, it's not appropriate for that. I think you hit at the other concerns that it's limited in who has the statutory authority to, send that message.
So an active shooter, would that qualify?
I think so.
Yeah, I believe so.
I wouldn't blanket, we wouldn't blanket the whole county, because then you get into this, do we have the agreements to send it to other jurisdictions? So we tested this once where we had it right on the Hamilton County line. Do we have the power to send a message to their residents, because we don't have the legal authority to do that in their community? So then we have these little bridge agreements or bridge contracts to allow us to let them send out the message on our behalf if it impacted both jurisdictions. So there's challenges.
Yeah, and there's one other concern I had with it too, and I had it and it slipped out of my head.
While you're thinking of that, let me go back to the communicator, which is the system with the landlines and more active, if it sparks anything for your leadership roles. There are townships that subscribe to that. So we have an account, we do it on behalf of everybody in the county. There are townships and cities that subscribe to ours, so they pay a fee. It's like $2,000, $2,400 to be a part of ours. So that way they don't have to buy their own Code Red system like you mentioned and others. That then gives you your own login, your own access to use that system for Ross Township. 2, it allows you to create database lists. So for instance, in my case, I have a list of all the county agencies. So when the county says, hey, we want to close the buildings because of a snow emergency, they use this system. And we put out a phone call and it calls all of the heads, it calls all of the offices. And we have all these different groups, like the dispatch center, we call in all the shifts of dispatchers. SWAT team, you could call that, say, call it the SWAT team, hazmat team, some of those other kind of regional components is through that system. So I say that not necessarily to sell it to you guys, but if that is of something of interest, a lot of communities in Butler County pay into our main system to have their own access. And then they can call out their road crews or whatever, you know, if you don't already have a system. It's a much cheaper way to do it than buying your own system.
And I think some jurisdictions use it for water main, like
Absolutely.
routine notifications, not just for emergencies. If you called us and said, hey, we want to send this out to our reverse 911 system, we're going to look to it as an emergency.
Right.
If you have if you buy into the system, then that opens the opportunity for you to use it for more routine causes as well.
Use it a lot for water main breaks.
Yeah.
It's like that, because it's just a nice, easy way. And people are like, well, I'd like to be notified. You know what? You can log into Code Red, sign up, you'll be notified. And it's a really nice way to organize that.
Yeah, and it allows people to, sorry, real quick, you sign up for one system and then we've got them in all systems, right? So if they're in Ross and they want to put their cell phone in there, then we put it in the main system. So now we have a big emergency and their cell phone's in there too.
So the piece of iPulse that I forgot, it came back to me. So in the same way that you can opt out of a Amber Alerts on your phone, you can opt out of iPulse. So it's not a fail-safe system. The only one system that you're not able to opt out of is the presidential alert. That's an authority that they can send that message whenever the president deems it's necessary. So people can opt out of that iPulse. Obviously, we encourage people not to do that. But that's one of the reasons why it's so important that we use it appropriately, because we don't want that, alert fatigue that can set in if we're sending out way too many messages about things that are not critical. Waking people up in the middle of the night, they're less likely to listen to the alerts and warnings. The same reason why you make it an Amber Alert system and why is it screaming at me at 3 a.m. and hit the button and not look at it? We want to fight that alert fatigue.
So one other piece I want to mention, because messaging, we could talk on this all day, but I think it's worth noting, with this plan and this process. So when you guys reach out to us and they give some basic advice or incident information, okay, we've got this active incident going on. Some things that work behind the scenes. So we have a countywide hotline, 785-5800. We update that almost every day. So again, if this was a tornado, you could blast it, put it right on your window out here, that number, and we could update that message every 5 minutes. Hey, for residents in this area that are impacted, that need this, again, we'll put out just a general message that we record on your behalf. Things that we don't always think about through this plan that happen. So again, when you notify us of something, we may be standing up other resources, notifying county agencies, county administration, things like that on the background, other departments that may have to come. We're going to be forward leaning on a lot of things that are happening to make those notifications. That active aggressor incident, a lot of people don't realize the Madison school shooting, good example, right? That happens, that pings off. Obviously, you have your local police and fire responding to that scene. Well, there's things that we're doing on the background. We have mass casualty trailers. We have communication with our media outlets. We have communication with neighboring jurisdictions that we're doing that nobody else even knows is happening. And those are getting preempted, ready, if not even getting ready to dispatch. So we're making those communications with the chiefs. Hey, what do you need? We can make that a little bit smoother and faster along that process. So there's a lot of other communication elements that the plan touches on that aren't necessarily like that communicator or that reverse 911 that I think are important that this partnership really brings on. And that's why I go back to what we said at the beginning. I think this is about the people understanding that process and how to get those resources more than that binder that I passed around sitting up on a shelf somewhere like that, and I think I'm proud to say, obviously, a couple of you all are on our board, so kind of the behind the curtain what the resources are, but for the rest of everybody, it's nice to say, hey, we've got a good working relationship with you all and you with us. So appreciate that.
We also, to further that point, the Oregon district shooting, I was one of the first outside of, the response agencies to know that was happening. I got an alert on my phone, a phone call, as I was driving down the highway, hey, this is happening, immediately called Adrian Medical Center, Westchester Hospital. Those are two hospitals that are a little bit further away from the Oregon district, but they're also sit in Butler County. It's probably unlikely that the message had made it down to them, but they are still in the path of somebody that maybe was shot and fled. They could have found themselves at Atrium or it's not, depending on the size of the incident, it's not outside the realm of possibility that some of the minor patients could have been transported to those trauma centers to the south because they've overwhelmed the trauma centers to the north. So, that information, I was the first to notify Ohio Emergency Management Agency, hey, that this happened by using the relationship that we have through our, Southwest regional liaisons from Ohio EMA to share that message, right, and get those resources. And probably, that going up to the state probably started the state patrol on some of that response as well. So, again, those are things that we don't really talk about a lot. It's stuff that happens in the background that people don't necessarily understand, but realize that I talk to, emergency managers in Southwest Ohio 3-4 times a day on a group chat that I have, if not more. So we have those informal communication channels that are really active all the time, and that information is being shared in real time.
And that works in the reverse as well. So again, active aggressor, because that's a big one, draws a lot of attention, a lot of resources coming in. There's DHS resources, federal resources knocking on your door. We have fired AK, Middletown Fire Chiefs getting blown up by DHS folks. We can handle that on the back end for you and quench those people pestering you, so to speak. Some of those other acronyms that come from the federal level and would just be pestering you for information, because that does happen. And so, not only can we share information, but we can also be that go-to. Don't ever hesitate to put us in the middle and say, talk to the emergency management office, and we'd be happy to keep your phone from melting down while something's going on.
We're also monitoring other things in the state as well. So, I'm a professor at Ohio Christian University. They actually had an active gunman on campus, this week. That's information that I collect. Bless you. I collect that and I share that with, my partners in Southwest Ohio, right? Because that's not going to affect us, but it's possible that is one element of a complex coordinated attack, right? And resources that we do have here in the county, such as Cincinnati State Middletown, Miami University Regionals, you see, for some of our partners down in Hamilton County, those could be assets that are at risk. Sharing that information puts it on the radar, identifies, hey, if you see something that's maybe a little bit peculiar or odd, today may be the day to ask about those questions and share that information. Unfortunately, we've done that and seen, the effects of, what we thought were isolated instances, impacting Butler County. And you go back to some of the protests that have happened, here in the recent past, that were outside of the county that ultimately made their way to the county, or, were pop-ups because of, events that we've had in other communities. Sharing that information, make sure that we're all kind of watching, hey, identifying, hey, this can be.
Like a BOLA to a degree.
Yeah.
Further questions, thoughts? Talking along with the plan, any concerns in particular?
I got one. This came up a couple months ago when we were out of power and we were thinking about cooling stations. Does the county EOP, do you guys have any agreements with Ross Local School District as far as sheltering? Do you guys have something in place, or would you recommend that Ross Township generates some type of MOU with either Ross Local School District, either for cooling, sheltering? What would you suggest on that?
So to be honest, I would recommend having something, and it wouldn't just be for cooling, it would be for emergency sheltering operations. We do have what the Red Cross has built over the years called the National Shelter Database, NSS. And so that looked at a handful or more schools, churches, locations in each community, had those agreements with them. And changes in people at the Red Cross over time in their administration, that has gone down to very minimal capacity of verified locations. And so I say that because, what was the last one? Middletown?
Yeah.
We had, this was like in June when we had all the power outages.
Yeah, same time I'm referring to.
Okay, so we were working with our mass care lead, which is the Red Cross. And they said, well, we can take you over to the Islamic Center over in Mason. So we weren't even in the county. That was their closest shelter because they have new people and some new process. I said, that's okay. I'm gonna call fire chief. We can establish that agreement very quickly with the school. So I don't want to be the guy that says we'll do it just in time. but we do it just in time, almost every disaster.
Yeah.
So Trenton had major power outage. This was 5 years ago, really cold temperatures. Hey, you give us your community room, perfect. We've already got the shelter and supplies here at the fairgrounds. We've got the people that'll come do the inspection from the health department. We're going to talk to law enforcement that give us some security element. And within 2 hours, we're going to be operational in that school, wherever you want to go. But I say that to say you should probably have that conversation and already have an agreement with a kind of main location. If I was Ross Township, that's what I would do. So you already kind of know what that's going to be. And then if we have to plan B and take a church because it's closer to an area, we'll facilitate that.
I think in a declared disaster, I don't see them saying no. But I think on the board's behalf, I think it would be a good idea to get a foot ahead and.
Absolutely.
Goshen's case was the high school. Was that an already pre-identified location? No. Did they go in there just in time? And they set up a large Red Cross operation. I mean, they had national people from 50 different positions involved in there. We were in there, I don't know how many days we went up there to help. So, I mean, it was a big ordeal. Again, it's just in time. Everybody in the community knows to go to the high school, set it up. That's where food and water were given out, all the information, case management, everything. So good idea.
How often do you guys engage with the business community, the residents, workshops, walkthroughs? I mean, I know our public safety services obviously walk through and have their plans and their drawings for things, but do you ever sit down with them and say, let's think through what your options are as a business or what your plans are as a business? I'm thinking, again, bigger than a week or two, right? The major ones. And it's a little different on my other side of life because my job is that income tax flows, right? Like we get you back up because we need you over the next 18 months. Someone's paying that bill while we're waiting for reimbursement. It's a little different out here and certainly not as much industry or retail, but it very much matters to those groups. So can you walk us through what that alignment should look like between this plan, this board, this building, this community, the business community? Like, what are some best practices there that we should?
So you probably have maybe some additionals, but a couple of things come to my mind, two really big ones. One, obviously, request if something's going on, invite us down, right? So we're happy to be a part of those. We go through businesses weekly. Generally, it's by invite, so we don't necessarily go out to businesses in that role. We do under that chemical businesses because we have the local emergency planning committee, so that's a separate thing. But generally for like preparedness stuff, we'll come out and talk to a business. We'll go into a school and do tornado shelter. I was up in Talawanda yesterday doing some tornado safe locations with the principal and things like that. But the second one, which is more important, I think COVID brought light to this. When we've deployed on national disasters, we've had a very strong connection with United Way and with our business chambers. And we brought that back to Butler County, and COVID was a good example. Brought all 5 chambers of commerce to our EOC, and we met with them twice a week during COVID because that was the biggest draw, one of the biggest draws in the schools. It was a big impact because then
Sure, yeah,
trickled down.
but that was immediate, yeah.
Businesses were confused. Who could open? How could they open? They needed, and that's why things like you guys have the stands, right? Those little stands with the BC Care sticker that came from our business chamber meeting group. So we literally set time, brought those leaders in. So what do the businesses need? They need those. Okay, we're going to get 1,000 of them. Went to the county commissioners. I need money. I don't remember how much that was at the time because those, if you remember at the time, you couldn't get those.
Couldn't get that, right.
So we had to call certain people. We had to put a lot of money towards that. We had to actually build them, which took time.
Right.
So anyway, all those pieces happened within the first couple of weeks due
Had to
to.
put stickers on.
Oh, yeah, let's not talk about that.
Yeah.
So-
We already have.
Right. Some want stickers, some don't want stickers, whatever. But nonetheless, the need came from the business community,
Right.
came from the chamber presidents. They have the pulse of their populations. We connected with them. Same goes with, everybody says, well, what happens when we now have our access and functional needs, special needs folks, right? Our elderly, those that are homebound.
Yep.
Meals on Wheels is a good example. So we work with those partners who lead those organizations, and we'll get Jennifer Beaker on the line and say, Jennifer, I need you to connect with your community base, tell us what you need, where and how, versus us physically going and connecting to all those. We'll go to the nursing director at the Butler County Health. She connects with all of our nursing homes. So she can do a blast and connection point, and that's what we did in June, the same storm chief was talking about. We said, hey, we're gonna give you some time here, we need you to do a pulse all these. Guess what we found? 3 nursing homes without power. We actually had trailer generators. You guys have had one of them here. Took that up to the nursing home with an electrician on site to power up a nursing home. That way we're not calling squads and school buses to evacuate a nursing home, things like that. That just happened June 13th, I think it was. Sorry, you got more.
No, I think you hit the coordination element, during COVID, we called them community touch points. And every 4 days a week at 3:00, we did a phone call, conference call, open to anybody in that specific field. You were welcome to join in, and just shared the information that we had. So Mondays were our Chamber of Commerce calls. So all the chambers of commerce got on. They had us for as much time as they need us. We answer any of the questions that we could, and get information from them that maybe we had to follow up on. On Tuesdays was fire chiefs. On Wednesdays was police chiefs. On Thursday was other community partners and agencies. And we would open that up. And so in times of emergency, we build those systems and identify those touch points and how we can reach out. In times of, blue skies, gray skies, and blue skies, we deal with, the Hamilton Safety Council, and we'll give presentations on business continuity and other, programs and elements that we do. We do that with the Chambers of Commerce at times, and we've done some other presentations with them as well, but all focused on emergency preparedness. We do those community visits. If somebody reaches out to us and says, hey, what do we do if there's a tornado? What do we do if there's a fire? We will work with them, guide them back to FEMA guidance and doctrine, resources that are made available through the ready.gov program. We'll work with them, to kind of, solve those issues and answer those questions that they have.
Yeah, because some places are they're certified weather ready, right? They're storm ready. Yeah, exactly. They're ready to go. Some have special FEMA requirements and are part of like the food supply chain and come right back up. And, but some of them, it's just having a place for people to be able to go for business continuity for their own house, their own homes, their livelihood, right? That's probably what's more relevant out here is you can still have a paycheck because your business did the homework.
Yeah, and not to go too deep on that, but that's the cascading impacts is what we don't think of when we think of a disaster. I know of several small grocery stores and little stop and go shops that went under because a lot of times in those industries, frozen foods and refrigerated foods are not covered under insurance. And so if you lost your inventory, that's a major concern. And so we've deployed to, Hurricane Irma. We were down in South Central Florida. You walk into a Walmart and there's caution tape around every, frozen food and refrigerated food section in that area. That's a huge hit. Now Walmart can probably absorb that, but can your local IGA, can your local grocery store? Probably not. I mean, if they're not, appropriately insured. And so when we do our discussions on business continuity, when we do our discussions on, with the business community on that, one of the things that we talk about is, what is your risk profile and what can you mitigate? And if you can't mitigate it, can you insure against it? Can you make sure, I can't make sure that I'm always going to have power, but I can make sure that I pay my insurance premium that does cover. And I ask the questions that make sure that what I need to cover is covered. And so, that's part of that, education process and program that we do. Again, a lot of times through the safety councils. I've done Hamilton, you've done Hamilton, you've done Middletown as well. We've also done some presentations for, other groups that maybe aren't quite business focused, but it's still a business continuity, discussion.
So one final piece on that thought too, I think it's important to note. So us, we're you. So like a lot of times people say, well, your county agency is EMA. I'm not paid by the county agency. Jim's not, our trucks, our stuff. This is all Ross Township and all the jurisdictions within. So we really look at that like we are all the same in terms of employees. I know we reside up in the county, so to speak. But at the end of the day, that's not who's paying the bills for emergency management in Butler County. It's the communities. They're all paying in individually and a part of that per capita rate. So just keep that in mind too. I mean, don't ever look at it like, it's a burden to us to do anything to support Ross, because that's why we enjoy getting out in the communities to do it, because we represent the communities. So.
Cool. You guys good?
Yeah. Appreciate it.
Appreciate the opportunity to come down. Yeah. Now the test begins on the binder, keeps me in line, so. Is the plan to hopefully endorse this and move forward with this tonight or in the future, or are you guys just reviewing? Like there was a proclamation, I didn't know if you guys had talked about where.
I don't know that we've had a ton of discussion about it. I think this is like the first step in that. I know there's some digging in some of my files that I want to do for some best practices. I think there's an engagement piece that could potentially spin out of this that I think is important for the community. It's kind of like that business continuity, residential preparedness. I think that needs to be a full discussion, that it's more than an execution document. It's also a policy document,
Sure.
Priority document. And I think we have a very good start to it, but might be some things that we could tweak and add based off of these conversations. That's me. What about you guys?
Sure.
I'd like us in the really near future to work on that reverse 911 for our community, so the word gets out there. Think we can work through Steve with that, or how do we get that out, the word out to our public that they can sign up for that?
Yeah, I think that's probably a good course, and we have somebody on our team that handles that component. So, if you're talking about getting into that contract to be a part of having access to that, I think we can certainly sit down and talk.
Yeah.
Again, good example, COVID, the health department was like, man, we need this for XYZ groups.
Right.
So all of a sudden, a year or two ago, they said, okay, here's the deal. You want to jump on in, here's the cost with it. Somebody at the health department and Tanya from our shop worked it out. Absolutely.
Okay. On that reverse 911, that is a cost back to the township to provide that for the community?
If you choose to be a user of it, you can.
Okay.
Are you talking about Code Red or reverse 911?
Well, so it's the same.
Is it the same? It's just the different, okay.
It's just a different
website.
It's just a different vendor. Does the
Got it.
same this process.
But I don't think it's a very good system.
But you have access, so if you need to send a message, let us know now. If you want to use it for more routine groups or to develop some more community engagement type components, you can buy into that system too. Much cheaper than any other system you're going to get, because we already own the data. So you're just part of that contract that we're paying. We just split it down based equally on all the partners that are involved.
So what kind of cost are we looking at for the Ross community?
So it's
Buy-in.
to buy in, it's like 23, 24, probably 2,300, maybe even
Probably,
less.
yeah.
Might even be less than that.
Is that the one where you can also like opt into, I want to be in for this, this, and this?
Yes.
That's what I thought. So you can push it out there and say, do you want to be notified of water main breaks? And if someone says, nope, just the big stuff,
That's right.
they're on that list. If they say, yep, I want everything, they're on that list. If they don't have kids in the schools, and so if we were to have something school related, they just don't need it, they don't have to be on the list for it. It's user driven.
Communicator system. Nixle is a free version.
That is Nixle.
Is that what you were talking about, Nixon?
Yeah, Nixle is a free version. A lot of people use that.
Kramer started that.
Yeah, you already have that.
$2,300 annually, or is it a one-time buy-in?
Annual.
Okay.
Yeah, we're subject to a contract with it. So all we do is all the partners that Westchester would pay the same thing. Everybody would pay. We just split it down by the more people you add, it just lowers the cost for everybody.
So I know it's
Westchester, Oxford, like county sheriff's office has a separate piece of ours, health department. There's a whole number of them.
Yeah.
Hamilton has it. I'm trying to think, there's probably a lot of others.
Monroe.
In the health
Oh,
department.
has it?
Who?
Monroe.
Monroe.
But I don't know if we're through you guys or if we're separate.
I think maybe Code Red and Monroe.
It is.
Trenton expressed some interest in joining. I don't know that.
Friends join.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I said, it doesn't, we pay a piece of it, we're a member as well. I don't know if county pays a piece.
So if we were to go with that, how do you get to our community's numbers? Does it automatically just, like you said, would ping off of a tower? So it's automatically going to the cell phones in the community?
So it's
Or
not-
do they have to, hey, this is my cell phone number, add me to that list?
That's right. Yeah.
It would be,
We
this
have-
is my cell phone, add me to that
Correct.
list.
We have like a portal on our website. So
Okay.
We open it to anybody that can go in and sign up. So I could sign up one address in the community if I want my cell phone.
And then I can check all those boxes that you talked about as well, that I want. Or again, if you guys were a partner, you could have your own portal on the Ross Township webpage that has the things
Right.
that you want. And then it would put people in specific groups and that kind of thing.
And you could sign up for an elderly parent's home and identify your cell phone number with that location. So that if it's something that hits them, it gets you the message, you can relay that to them. But we do have the landline data
Okay.
for those addresses. That's in the GIS. We draw the line around it. And then if you wanted to put your cell phone in, and you would stake it to a number, an address, and then that would tell us that that address is associated with that phone number. And then if you find yourself in that loop, you would get the call.
But for us to notify the residents that we're even implementing this, we'd have to put like on our Facebook page or our website or something, just to make them aware of it so that they could sign up for it.
For the cell phone
Right.
information.
You would already have the landlines, those
Yes.
that have registered landlines.
And how many people still have landlines?
The number, older people.
The number is dwindling.
For sure.
But those older people also might have like family members that live in Kentucky and would just like to get a heads up if there's a power outage, if, check on mom and dad or whatever the case may be.
And it still hits a larger number than you would think. I mean, and some of that is, like some cable companies required you to have a landline as a part of your cable. So there's some legacy numbers that are still out there and they're still in use that, people may not even know their own phone number, but they, it still rings through that.
If you have Bioptics, it's on there. It's on the bill.
Exactly, yeah. So
Since I don't.
there's some
Whatever it's named
legacy
today.
systems that are probably going to be around for a while.
So what do our department heads feel? They feel this reverse 911, is this something we should be moving forward with?
Oh, I think it's a good idea. 100% agree, because if something happens, that we need to notify the community.
Oh, Simon? What's the board think? Something we want to put on our next month's agenda? So go ahead and vote for that. Sure. Okay.
I'd like to see it wrapped into like a bigger engagement plan. So I think it's important. And if we want to do it on the next agenda, I think that's great. I just think it's a step in a plan, but it's a good first step to say, hey, this is residents.
Okay,
Here's a lot of.
explain. What do you mean a first step?
Well, I think it's, we talk about like educating and letting people know. I mean, everybody learned something even today, right? About what's
Yes.
out there. So yeah, think about how do we get all that information out to people? Is it a mailing? Is it a open house? Is it worked into the agendas here? We got to think about that. And what do they need? They need to know about that, right? They need to know ready.gov. I mean, there's just some things that are good reminders for people, some best practices to have in your house.
Shame we just
Here's
missed our newsletter.
Here's some things that we're thinking about, moving forward or taking some action about where we might have partnerships. I mean, I think all of that is something that people will want to know. And I think that's a great step for them to be able to sign up and have a little control over what they're notified of and who's notified in the family and how. I think that's awesome. So I'm totally supportive of the system.
Can you get the paperwork over to us next couple of weeks?
Sure.
That's awesome.
Thanks, guys. We appreciate you.
Yes, thanks for coming out and
Thanks for having me.
definitely the information is well needed.
Anytime too. So if you, as this evolves and you want us to go down and talk, to the residents or anything like that, you have to.
Awesome.
Thanks, Chief.
Thanks, you
Go ahead
guys.
and, thank you. Close the meeting, Ellen.
I was waiting until they left.
Oh,
And I'd like to make a motion to adopt. I'd like to move for the adoption of motion 22-148 to adjourn the meeting. Need a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Trustee Blower?
Yes.
Trustee Patterson?
Yes.
Trustee Orty?
Yes.
We'll
Start the next